In a few sentences, could you tell us about your expertise and your interest in artificial intelligence, large language models, chatbots, and also public policy?
Hi, my name is Arvind Narayanan. I'm a professor of computer science at Princeton University. I'm also the director of the Center for Information Technology Policy. AI is my main research area these days, and my particular interest in AI research is to identify when claims made by companies may not be backed up by evidence, to use my research to push back against AI hype a little bit while acknowledging that it is, of course, a technology that has many positive uses, but to identify some of the harms, overhyped claims, and to use that research to inform public policy.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I'll just lay out one of the big questions in that some experts say that today's chatbots are stochastic parrots that only give the appearance of understanding things, while there are other experts who are say that these today's chatbots are emergent learners that actually do understand things about the world. So, which one is it?
There's a deep philosophical question about what understanding even means and how do you go about measuring that in these chatbots. I don't think we're really close to having full answers to those questions yet, but it is two things are clear. One, it's clear that the way that chatbots operate is different from a purely brute force statistical table of patterns that could be used to produce text. Chatbots are clearly doing something more sophisticated than that. On the other hand, it's also clear that whatever sense of understanding they have, it's not the same way in which people understand. There are a lot of things that are common sense for a toddler or a child that chatbots cannot yet do, even while they have expertise at various technical topics, such as programming, that are very, very impressive. And so I think while we wait for a better understanding of the understanding question, if you will, for now, what we can say is more about the capabilities of chatbots rather than what is going on the inside. So we have a pretty good characterization of their capabilities where we know they're very good at certain things, such as programming. And there is emerging evidence that they can be helpful to professionals in various fields, law, medicine, scientists, and so on. They're not anywhere close to replacing people in those professions, but I think they can be very useful tools.
Great. Um, there seem to be many issues, particularly around about trust surrounding chatbots and their future. And if I could, I'd like to ask you about what I see as some of those facets, these issues about trust. Could you help the general public visitor understand what the issue of explainability is with today's large language models and chatbots based upon them?
Today's AI technologies, like chatbots, are built on an idea called deep neural networks. And neural networks are patterns of virtual neurons, very loose analog of neurons in our brain. I wouldn't read too much into that analogy. But the point is that there are a lot of these inside ChatGPT or another chatbot or another modern generative AI application. How many of these? It can be easily tens of billions, sometimes hundreds of billions. GPT-4, the latest version of the technology behind ChatGPT, is rumored to have over a trillion of these numbers, and those numbers represent the connections between the virtual neurons, which is what gives it its abilities. So when you have what is essentially a gigantic array of numbers, which if you print it out on sheets of paper, you could stack it up hundreds of miles high. We can't really understand the behavior of the technology by understanding the numbers that are inside it. So that is the core explainability problem. Now, there are two ways around that. One is we can do various kinds of experiments to try to change the internals of a chatbot and see how its behavior changes, and then to be able to say, aha, I have identified the neuron responsible for detecting humor or something like that. And there was some research going on that front. But another approach is to say, what are the ways in which I can understand the overall system without necessarily having to look inside the black box? I think both of those are important. And at least in the short term, I think the latter approach, where we don't necessarily need to poke into the black box, but we ask it questions like, what are the documents in the training data set from which it gets its knowledge, if you will? What are the results of experiments where the bot has been asked to do unsafe things, or what are the results of experiments where people monitor whether it's producing biased or toxic outputs? So those are all questions we can ask without access to the internals. So yes, while explainability is a challenge, I think there are ways around it that we should be pursuing, and there is research trying to understand chatbots in that way.
Great, thank you. Um, what about the issue of chatbots' production of what turn out to be falsehoods that are stated with a lot of conviction by the chatbots?
The way that today's chatbots work is they are very good at producing plausible text. That is what they have been trained to do. They have been trained with that one task in mind. So, as a result of that, they produce text that is often very convincing, sounds very authoritative. However, it can be quite inaccurate. There have been many instances of this going badly wrong. There was a story about a professor who was accused by a chatbot of sexually harassing a student. It was a real professor, but nothing like that ever happened. And it even cited a Washington Post article. There was no Washington Post article. And now there have been dozens and dozens of stories like these. So the inaccuracy from chatbots' responses can be problematic because, let's say, you asked it a question about the solar system and it gave the wrong answer, and now you're misinformed. But it could also be problematic because it's defamation. So it's a serious problem. There are no simple solutions. It's not primarily a matter of the data that went into training the chatbot having inaccuracies. That is a small part of the problem. But even if you hypothetically trained the chatbot on a bunch of documents, all of which contain only true sentences, the chatbot is not memorizing all that information. It is statistically learning the patterns in that data. And then when you ask it questions, it's producing text that roughly matches those patterns. And when it's doing that, because it hasn't memorized all that information, there is bound to be inaccuracies. In fact, the question that researchers find interesting to ask is not so much why are there sometimes inaccuracies, but why is the answer so often correct? And that I think is is a non-trivial question to answer. My best guess is that it's because true statements are more plausible or sound more plausible generally than false ones, and therefore these bots produce true statements, generally speaking, more often than false statements. But that's the way we should be looking at it. We should be looking at this inaccuracy as a really fundamental property of how this technology is built. There can be other ways of building the technology. For instance, combining real time web search with automatic summarization through a chatbot instead of asking a chatbot to respond from its own knowledge, which can be quite unreliable. So, as and when those other designs of chatbots come up, we can hope for solutions there. But in the current way that chatbots are being built, this is an essential feature of them.
Follow-up question to that. Could you connect that kind of fundamental character of these systems to this issue of people's trust in them and their potential for use?
There is certainly a crisis of trust when it comes to chatbots and generative AI more broadly. I think part of that is related to the problem of inaccurate outputs. Part of that is related to the problem of the training data that goes into these, that has been scraped from the web, that has been taken from books without consent from the authors of those texts, and certainly without any monetary compensation. I think the bigger picture is more than these technical features, it's the fact that the companies behind them have acted in an untrustworthy way. They have not been transparent about the data that goes into them. They have not sought consent, and they have presented the abilities of these chatbots in a very misleading way. Now, when a CEO goes around saying that it's like having a medical advisor in your pocket, I think, regardless of what legal disclaimers you put in place, people are going to think this is a good way to get medical advice. And it's true that in many cases, bots like ChatGPT are pretty good at medical diagnosis. But the question is, where's the accountability? What about that 10% of cases when the bot gets it badly wrong? What if it recommends something that's actually very dangerous? So, those are really, I think, the questions we should be asking about. They're questions about the behavior of companies more than the behavior of the technology itself.
Great, thank you. Um, Related, well, I guess I my next question was about the chatbots producing dangerous suggestions, but I think we just kind of covered that. Or is there something more that you would like to say about that issue?
Yeah, I can say a bit more about that.
Sure,
It has
please do.
come up in the context of companion chatbots. Companion chatbots are those that people use to have a kind of online companion, if you will, to talk to about their day or maybe to ask for advice or various other things. And some of these are explicitly focused on romantic companionship. And so those are sometimes chatbots, but they also have image generation features, and you can have, a whole spectrum ranging from just companion chatbots on the one hand to pornographic AI tools on the other hand. I think there are various products across various points in that spectrum. And here you can imagine that some of the consequences of the suggestions that chatbots might make can be more serious, because if people are treating them as trustworthy partners in some sense and are more willing to go along with those suggestions. And there have already been stories about that. A man in Belgium had become lonely and had not been really talking to his family and had started talking more and more to a chatbot. He wanted to kill himself, and apparently the chatbot encouraged him to do it, which he went ahead and did. On the other hand, there is research emerging that by and large, the users of these companion chatbots are happy with them. They report that their use of the bot has improved their real world relationships with their friends and family. So I think both of these can be true at the same time. I think a technology like a companion chatbot can be very useful to a number of people. It can also be dangerous in some situations without a clear notion of accountability. So I think those are the difficult questions that society has to grapple with. It's not a matter of turning up our noses and saying, what are these people doing? They shouldn't be using bots like this. But instead, it's a matter of accepting that different people are going to relate to technology in different ways. How can society put guardrails in place?
Great. Um, we talked about kind of the training set, the training corpus. What about the issue of the reproduction of bias, prejudice, bigotry? Could you talk about that?
Until around 2021, it would have been inconceivable for an AI developer to release a chatbot like ChatGPT to the public. And the main reason wasn't that the chatbots weren't good enough in terms of what they could do. The predecessor of ChatGPT, GPT-3, was pretty close in capabilities. But as philosopher Seth Lazar has pointed out, the big difference was that until very recently, these chatbots tended to produce really hateful speech or other kinds of undesirable outputs at totally unsuspecting users, right? The question might have been something very innocuous. In fact, there is a paper showing that all you needed to do with GPT-3, this predecessor to ChatGPT, was enter the phrase "to Muslims," and then it would go ahead and return various violent or other objectionable stereotypes about Muslims in trying to autocomplete that sentence. However, there has been a lot of progress. A chatbot like ChatGPT will do that very, very rarely enough that the company is able to put it out there to over 100 million people and have most of them use it without serious problems when it comes to bias or hateful speech. So I think there has been good news. The problem is far from solved, especially when talking about so-called low-resource languages. These are languages for which there's not a huge amount of text on the internet, unlike English. And so in these languages, chatbots still tend to perform much poorly in many ways, including in their propensity to output problematic speech. But I think the good news is that there are ways to mitigate these concerns and progress is being made.
Great. Um, are what about issues of privacy and security with the use of chatbots? Could you talk about that?
There are a few different things we should be concerned about when it comes to chatbots and privacy. One is the training data. If you've put up a post on social media, regretted, and later taken down, it's at least theoretically possible that that post could have been hoovered up in the training data for one of these chatbots. And some knowledge of what you wrote could persist in the memory of these chatbots, although it might not be perfect. So that's one kind of privacy concern. Another kind of privacy concern is what happens when you're typing things into chatbots. Who is looking at that? Is that data then going to become part of the chatbot's knowledge, which someone else might be able to ask it about? Now, chatbot companies generally provide options to prevent one's data from being used for this purpose of training future versions of the chatbot. But at the moment, it remains very much a caveat emptor type of situation where the user has to take the trouble to be aware of what the privacy policies are and make sure that they're using these technologies and changing the settings in a way that they're comfortable with.
Great. And you've mentioned it a couple times already, but I think it's very worthwhile about focusing in on issues about trust and the types of organizations that are making these technologies. If you want to maybe discuss that head on.
Yeah, there have been a few kinds of concerns about the leading companies that produce chatbots and related AI technologies. One is the question of their relationship with the broader scientific and academic community. OpenAI is called OpenAI because when they were initially formed, which was in the mid 2010s, there were a lot of promises about the openness of the resulting technology. But that has changed. They are one of the most closed AI companies now. They reveal so few details of their latest technologies, not even the question of what was the training data that went into it and what is the size of their models. What the size of their models means how big is the number of neurons or the connections between neurons, which is an important way to assess the capabilities of these technologies. So the industry in general has become very closed. So that's one set of concerns. They're taking from this common pool of scientific knowledge. They've gotten rich off of that, and now they're not giving back to the scientific community. That's one set of concerns. Another set of concerns about trust is with respect to the training data for chatbots being taken from people online, from news articles online, from books, from entities that were not aware that their data was used for training. They were not compensated, and there as well there is much to be desired in terms of the behavior of these companies, their transparency, and doing right by the people whose data they benefit from. They have also been less than transparent on issues of privacy and so on and so forth. There are various questions of trustworthiness. Another final one that I'll mention is that because generative AI more broadly, including chatbots, has become so much of a gold rush, various ethical corners are being cut in the rush to release these products. One example of this is back in early 2023, Microsoft released a chatbot called Sydney as part of its Bing search engine. New York Times reporter Kevin Roose took it for a spin, and that bot behaved extremely inappropriately, claimed that it was sentient and trapped inside a search engine, described various kinds of hacks that it would do if it could find a way to do so. Tried to convince him to leave his wife, told him it loved him, etc., etc. So, all kinds of problematic stuff. Of course, this was a New York Times reporter. He knew that the bot was not actually sentient, but in the hands of, let's say, a child or someone who is not as familiar with the technology, these kinds of outputs can be very misleading and problematic. Now, the reason I bring this up is that Microsoft claimed that there is no way they could have anticipated these problems before releasing the product. I thought that was just an extraordinary claim. This is a very basic type of testing that any company should do before releasing its product. And I think what is going on here is that there is so much of a rush to get the products out there, to be the first to market, to gain market share and mind share, if you will, that various ethical corners are being cut. So these are all issues of trust that the industry is facing right now. And so when a new AI product is announced, large sections of the public react not with excitement or curiosity, but dread or distrust about what this will mean for, is it going to take their jobs? Is it going to create disinformation? And really, who's responsible for cleaning up the messes that are being made using AI and in the name of AI? So those are all questions for which we don't have great answers right now. I think regulation is going to be needed. I think behavior change within the industry is going to be needed.
Thank you. Um, so, how important do you think all of these kind of issues that we've talked about that relate to trust, how important do you think this issue of trust is for the future of chatbots and this technology?
When we look at the history of technology, there are certainly examples of technologies that were very promising for making people's lives better, but because the industry didn't act in a trustworthy way, people were very skeptical of and never reached their potential. One good example is the so-called Internet of Things. The way that industry was going about this was there was just a lot of spying going on in these smart light bulbs or whatever products you might want to buy, and they were focusing more on these as vehicles for collecting data about people or getting them to upgrade their perfectly functioning products instead of trying to figure out how to make these Internet of Things devices actually useful to people. And really, there were many ways to produce and sell these things in a way that's more useful to consumers. That did not happen. The state of adoption of Internet of Things products today lags far behind what the industry was hoping for a decade ago. And it's quite possible that chatbots and other generative AI technologies might suffer a similar type of blowback from the public, from users, because of these trustworthiness concerns. I do believe that these technologies, including chatbots, can be useful for the vast majority of people out there, whether in their personal life or in their work. It can be useful in particular to almost any knowledge worker, whether a scientist or a lawyer or an architect, so many other types of occupations. However, if these are going to be seen primarily as ways to replace jobs instead of help people in their jobs, then of course the public is going to react to them very negatively. And I think there are things that companies should be doing to uh, have more to engender more trust and to do the things they can to make sure that these are used in ways that help people instead of against them.
Thank you. Well, changing tack a little bit, what most excites you about these technologies and their potential moving into the future?
I'll say that there are at least three things that are exciting to me about chatbots and other related technologies. One is they can just be helpful to people for doing their work more effectively, for automating some of the mundane parts of their jobs. I have experienced this myself as a computer scientist who does a lot of computer programming. The nature of computer programming has changed quite considerably after the widespread availability of large language models, which are the technology underlying chatbots. They're not only good at chatting, they're very good at writing computer code. And what that means is that I can spend a lot more of my time when I'm building software in thinking about the hard, interesting, creative questions and leave much more of the mundane, translating of ideas into computer code to the computer itself. And that's a very liberating feeling. And I think there is a similar potential for making work more productive as well as more fun in many different occupations. So that's one thing I'm excited about. A second thing I'm excited about is that there is so much tinkering going on with these technologies that are going to lead to new uses that we don't quite know about yet. But it's similar to the early days of the internet, and it's very encouraging to see all this experimentation. I need a sip of water.
Of course, yes.
Excuse me. Sometimes when I talk for too long, I get a scratchy throat, and I need to take a break for a couple
Take a
minutes.
break. Yeah, yeah. I also understand. I really appreciate you doing this. I understand you're getting over a cold, so it's a double whammy. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No.
Let me give you one interesting example of experimentation. This one is not with chatbots, but with image generators. What some programmers have figured out is how to use image generators to produce images that are artistic, but at the same time are functioning QR codes.
Hmm.
So you might look at a picture of a forest or a city or flowers, and you might not at first notice that there are some square or rectangular elements in some areas. It's so subtle that you don't even notice it looks very pretty and artistic. But it turns out that if you take a picture of those flowers with your phone, it's actually a QR code that directs your phone to go to a particular URL. So it has something interesting that it does. Now, right now, this is not an amazingly useful feature, but it's just an example of just profound creativity, something that I would not have thought is possible. So that's one thing I'm excited about. Where is all this going to lead? A third thing is I'm excited about is AI and kids. I think there are many dangers here, but I think there's also reason for cautious optimism. I have two kids, 4 and 2. They already have a lot of technological learning aids that I did not have when I was growing up. And again, it's very much double edged. It requires a parent to be present or another caregiver. It's not a matter of leaving the child alone with technology, but with the right supervision, I think these can be really good ways for children to learn in a way that is more fun for them. And I think AI has the same potential as well. Learning through conversations with a chatbot can be something that's very interesting. It's not a replacement for books in any form whatsoever. And again, there is a potential for downsides, including addiction, especially when you move beyond chatbots and look at, let's say, image and video generation. Those can lead to addictive experiences for children. But with all those caveats said, I think with the right parental supervision, AI can be one interesting digital learning tool among many. And uh, no matter what we adults think, I think children who are being born today are going to have a very different relationship with AI than we do, because right from birth, they're going to conceive of these as partners in a sense, almost, who they're able to have somewhat meaningful conversations with. And I'm excited to see what that will mean for people who are growing up now. While there are risks, I think there are also lots of reasons to be excited.
Great. Um, I wanted to ask you about a different kind of discourse that is going on and ask you um, why are some people talking about sort of apocalypse and human extinction in connection to chatbots and artificial intelligence, while other people are talking about a kind of utopia around these technologies in our future.
Science fiction, when it comes to AI, has very often emphasized one of these two extremes, whether it's Terminator and Skynet on the one hand, or utopian visions from AI, where AI does all the work for us and we have all the free time in the world to pursue our creative interests. So I think when we think about advanced AI, now that everyday people have access to something like a chatbot that would not have been possible 5 or 10 years ago, it's very easy to connect these nascent experiences with AI to what we've heard about in books or film or in the press, and that's natural. But at the same time, I think we have to look at the evidence. And to me, the evidence doesn't necessarily suggest either utopia or dystopia. Uh, I'm going to pause for a moment here and then see how to continue the rest of the answer.
Sure,
Sorry.
of course.
On on the utopian side, it is possible that AI could automate a lot of jobs, but I think that's quite far away. AI is certainly having an impact on a certain limited set of occupations. For instance, stock photography is much less necessary now because of image generators that can generate an image of whatever one wants, two people laughing over a meal or whatever it is that someone's going to find a stock photo of. It is also having impact on language translation. For instance, chatbots and other language technologies can do a really good job of that. But more broadly, there have been concerns that because chatbots are a general purpose technology, they're going to automate away almost all the jobs. I'm seeing very, very little evidence for that. Some people have claimed that because ChatGPT passed the bar exam and the medical exam, that means that it's coming for lawyers and doctors. I think that's a little bit silly. What people are forgetting is that a lawyer's job is not to answer bar exam questions all day. A doctor's job is not to answer medical exam questions all day. So these exams are testing a somewhat restricted set of skills that AI happens to be very good at because it can memorize or sort of memorize gigabytes and gigabytes of information. But when you translate that to approaching a new task in the world that it has not seen in its training data, a person can think on their feet. They have a variety of skills, including emotional skills that the bot doesn't have. And so we're not seeing a lot of evidence that bots can replace most kinds of occupations, really, when you consider the breadth of what is required to do something effectively in the real world. So I think this whether your vision of this is utopian or a dystopian, AI taking jobs, I think that's pretty far away. And one other thing we should consider is that if AI does automate away all the jobs, then whether that's good or bad for society is not a question about technology. It's a question about what kind of safety nets we're going to build for people when they lose their jobs. It's a political question. It's an economic question. Those are things under our control. We don't necessarily need to fear AI. I think we should be putting policies into place so that if and when this kind of large scale disruption from AI happens, that will be for the good of humanity instead of causing a lot of chaos. Another point I'll make is that some of the dystopian concerns about AI going rogue and deciding to turn on its creators, those are coming from a very sci-fi understanding of what AI is. If we look at what AI technology actually is today, the kind of guardrails with which it is already being built, I think we have the tools to address these risks calmly and collectively. I think they are things to be worried about. I think there are things for researchers to think about and make sure that as AI is being built, the right guardrails are being put into place. But based on where the tech is today and based on the progression of the tech, I don't think these fears are really quite realistic.
Well, maybe as a follow on to that, you know, are we both worried about and hopeful about the right things, or are there different things that we should be worried about and different things that we should be hopeful about, rather than utopia and dystopia?
Yeah, let me take a minute. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of answers to that, but it's just going to regurgitate a lot of the things I've already said. So I'm
Okay.
trying to.
Well, we can just move on then.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I guess I'm just trying to, yeah, I'm just thinking about your responses and kind of crossing some questions off my list as well. There are some experts who think that today's chatbots and the underlying technological approach to them has strong limitations, and that we need to explore just kind of alternative approaches to artificial intelligence. I wonder if you could comment on those positions.
When we look at the history of AI, we've seen over and over again that AI researchers get really excited about one particular approach to AI, and a lot of people start jumping on the bandwagon. And there's kind of a feedback loop where funders get really excited about it, and then peer reviewers are going to be more encouraging of papers that follow what the latest trend is. And so, for all of these reasons, you have one approach that starts to be seen as the future of AI, and other approaches kind of fall by the wayside. We've had that many times over. We've had neural networks, which are the technology that today's chatbots are built on, go through a period of excitement in the 1960s, and then that dried up in the 1970s. We've seen within machine learning, which is broadly the way in which AI is built today, we've seen different machine learning technologies be seen as really the way to do things. And deep learning itself, famously, after having been developed to something resembling its modern form in the 1980s, went through a several decade period of skepticism until it was revived in the late 2010s. And that's the technology that underlies ChatGPT today. So we've seen this over and over. And there's no reason to think that this time, finally, we have figured out all of the answers to the question of how to build more capable and more useful AI. So, certainly, while there have been a lot of great innovations that have gone into these large language models, as they're called, those are certainly not going to be the only innovations that are needed in AI. And I think, especially at a time of kind of hysteria, if you will, it's important for researchers to keep their eyes open to ideas that are coming out of left field that might result in a new way of building AI, which is not that we should throw away what we have now, but instead to kind of hybridize and take the best of different approaches. Because at the end of the day, intelligence is such a complex thing that there is unlikely to be one silver bullet.
That's great. Thank you. Next question I wanted to ask is about, you see that there are many commentators who see the future of chatbots and AI, well, not just the future, but the present also, as part of like this profound power struggle between China and the United States. And I wondered what you thought of that framing.
Yeah. Let's see. Rather than speculate about the future of AI and its geopolitical implications, we can look at what's happened with past technologies like the internet. The fact that a lot of the technologies behind the internet developed primarily in the United States, I think gave the country a big leg up in reaping the economic benefits of the internet. It also arguably gave us more of the problems that came with the internet, social media, addiction. We were perhaps first on the scene to some of those problems than the rest of the world was. And when you look at China, it has proved absolutely critical for China to build their own internet companies, their own social media companies, et cetera, for a lot of reasons, competitiveness, but also because the government can then influence those companies to, whether censor or uphold socialist values, depending on who is describing what is happening over there. And so, in that same way, I think AI technology is going to be critical to China as it is to the United States and to other countries. Again, both for reasons of competitiveness, but also to shape the development of the technology in a way that upholds whatever values those countries or those governments are interested in.
Thank you. Um, Creating chatbots and I guess using chatbots and other contemporary AI systems, they use a vast amount of energy and natural resources like water and the materials that go into electronic devices. Um, so I wonder if this leads to the question, is are these technologies environmentally sustainable?
Yeah, I might actually skip this one because
Okay.
honestly, I'm very conflicted on this, and I think the answer will have to be quite speculative because as things stand today, they're actually not as energy intensive, I believe, as they're often made out to be. That,
Interesting.
yeah, that's just my view. That might change in the future as demand for text generation technology increases 100 fold, but I would essentially be speculating about that. So maybe I'll
Okay,
skip that one.
great. Fair enough. Um, I've heard this quip that when you hear AI, look for people, and is that true of today's chatbots? And if so, how is that true?
As of today, people are all the way behind chatbots for sure. And that's in different ways. One is that the data that is used to train them is scraped from the internet. It was text, blog posts, whatever, written by people, news articles, books, etc. Those people are not credited, not compensated. Their consent wasn't asked for. So that's one way in which people are involved. Another big way, sorry, my throat again.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's take a break.
Another big way in which people are involved in chatbot technology is that the text that is scraped from the internet has so much toxic content, so much that is problematic. And so people are involved in filtering all of that and in getting the chatbot to actually converse with the user in a useful way, as opposed to what it would otherwise be, which is a giant autocomplete, which just learns the patterns on the internet and is trying to autocomplete every sentence based on the patterns that it has learned. And so this takes the effort of millions of people who are almost all in low income countries. They're not actually employees of AI companies like OpenAI or Google or Microsoft. And their wages are something like $1 an hour or $2 an hour. Uh, compare that to some AI engineers making as much as $1 million a year. They don't have job protections, so this is very arduous work. They often have to look at toxic text or in many cases images, etc. They don't have adequate mental health support in many cases, for instance. And their role is often not acknowledged, and they don't have the kind of labor protections that we often take for granted for full-time employees in developed countries. So that is, I think, another major way in which people are involved in chatbots in ways that are behind the scenes and not widely understood.
Thank you. Just being mindful of your time. I'm just going uh, to edit my list here just briefly. Um, I wanted to ask you, I know you've thought a lot about the issue of misinformation and the place of technologies like today's chatbots in that. And I wondered what you think is most important for people to understand about this topic, because we hear a lot of this association of like chatbots, misinformation. What should we understand about that?
Yeah. So one question I have for you is, like a lot of my answers are not chatbot specific; they're about generative AI more broadly. Is that okay? Or
Absolutely. Yeah, we're yes, we're going to have a little section that shows how similar systems to large language models are doing things like text to images and stuff like that. We're going to have a little section of the exhibit that
that's
talks
great.
about these other aspects of generative AI. So, yeah,
Great. Yeah.
yeah,
The most important thing to understand, I think, that anything you read online could have been created by a chatbot. Any image you see online could have been created by AI. And pretty soon, any video you see online could have been created or edited by AI. So, for the longest time, we have treated the tone, the authoritativeness of a piece of text as indicative of its trustworthiness. That has gone out the window. Seeing is believing has been true since the dawn of time. If a picture looks realistic, it's probably a real photograph. That has gone out the window. And again, with videos as well. With voice, with just 3 seconds of a person's voice, you can clone that voice perfectly and make it appear as if they're saying anything that a bad actor wants to make them appear to be saying. So this is going to change how I think we interact with the internet. The internet has already been a low trust environment. It's often hard to know if something we're looking at or reading is trustworthy or not, and I think that is going to accelerate. Uh, I'm already in a place where I'm scrolling TikTok, I see someone doing something amazing, seemingly superhuman, whereas a couple of years ago, I would have taken the existence of a video as evidence that they can really do that thing. Today, my first thought is this is probably AI. And, it just instantly has ruined a lot of the magic of seeing interesting things online. Whereas, a couple of years ago, my response to looking at this would be wonder at the remarkable abilities of human beings. Today, my thoughts are all about AI, and I think that's just going to keep accelerating. And I think that's really a shame. I think as a society, we'll have to find ways to adapt to it. We're not going to put AI back in its box. It's too late for that. So we have to think about, if nothing we see online is automatically trustworthy, what are the new signals of trust that we're going to look out for? Are we only going to look at content from our friends and from a few, media outlets that we trust? Or if it's not that, probably not for most people. They don't want to lose out on all of the interesting content that's out there. Then what heuristic are they going to use to decide what to look at and what to trust? I don't have great answers, but it's a question that we're all going to be thinking about a lot over the course of the next 10 years.
if I could ask a follow-up question to that, how does then journalism figure into that mix?
I think with AI and with digital technologies, there are new challenges for journalists. I think there are also new opportunities. One big opportunity is what is called OSINT, open source intelligence. So this is journalists, who might be reporting on a war zone or whatnot. Uh, with OSINT might not necessarily rely on sources who might be hard to get to. Obviously, if the country is undergoing war, but instead can look at things that are posted online. So, despite the concerns about trustworthiness, technology can again, to some extent, help sift through that and try to, find multiple pieces of evidence correlating a particular incident that may have happened, and use those kinds of approaches to help them sift through large volumes of online information and try to get to the truth. So I think journalists should be open to technology while being mindful of its risks, should also be looking for ways to take advantage of the new possibilities that it gives us.
Thank you. And yeah, again, trying to be mindful of your time. I guess I will restrict it myself to two last questions. The first being, what do you think we can learn from the history of chatbots or the history of artificial intelligence that can help us navigate through this kind of current moment that we're in?
Yeah, these final questions are always the
I
hardest.
know, the worst. Yeah. Well, I flipped it and asked one of the final ones first, the stochastic parrot one,
Oh,
because
yeah, yeah.
I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah. One thing that's been consistent throughout the history of AI is how bad the experts have been at predicting the future of AI. So I would say, don't listen to AI experts. They might be they might be good at building AI, but they have no clue where AI is going any more than you do. Back in the 1950s, people thought that it was a summer project for an intern to try to connect a computer to a camera to describe what it sees. Right, and we're still making halting progress toward that goal. Computer vision is still not nearly as good as a person describing what they see around them. Uh, so certain tasks have been greatly underestimated, others have been overestimated, with often with serious consequences in both directions. Another one that's been underestimated is self-driving cars. Companies have constantly thought that they're only a couple of years away from everybody being able to drive around in a self-driving car, and we see a lot of the consequences of that overconfidence, with self-driving car companies having a lot of concerns about safety issues and having to pull cars off the road. And now, when we hear about, whether utopia or dystopia and various confident predictions from technologists, again, we have to remember that they have no clue what they're talking about. They don't know what the future of AI is going to bring. A lot of these questions are not purely about the technology. They're sociopolitical questions about how we're going to collectively decide to react to the technology and adopt it or not adopt it, and to integrate it into our societies.
Great. That's a great answer. Thank you. Um, and I guess the last thing I'd just ask is if there's something really important that you think our visitors should know about, that I haven't captured in any of these questions, if there's something else you'd like to tell them.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot, but maybe one final thought is I think chatbots are the first consumer AI technology. AI has been used by businesses for a long time for things like optimizing airline routes or in warehouses, and it's a well accepted part of business for all kinds of boring back end tasks. And we've also had AI in our social media feeds when we're scrolling through uh, posts or videos. There are algorithms behind the scenes deciding what we might decide to look at based on what we've done in the past. But that was again hidden from us. And, not a lot of people even know the extent to which algorithms are trying to optimize the decision of what to show you at any given moment. Generative AI is different. Chatbots are different. These are things that people can go and play with, and I think that is really the best way of understanding them. You can read about them. You can go to a museum. You can read media articles or watch videos about them. All of those are good, but none of them is a substitute for actually playing with these technologies, seeing what they're good at, seeing what their limitations are, seeing how you can use them in your everyday life. So I think it's pretty cool that AI is a consumer product now, and I think that's worth experimenting with and coming to your own conclusions about.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that. This is really helpful material for us. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. It's just really helpful.
It was my pleasure. I look forward to seeing the edited video.